can't read.
So it wasn't. Harry didn't have the seats.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Lily Tomlin always.
It was not that long ago that the idea of a company saying anything about politics, coming out with an overt political statement, or responding to a question about its political beliefs was almost unheard of. Corporations often acted like being political was something they would stay as far away as possible from. And now it feels like you literally cannot get them to be quiet about their political beliefs and the things that they want to be involved in and have their hands in. Susan, when did that change?
When did that change? I think it was about 6 years ago. LGBTQ activism was kind of the first, I think the first foray into taking stands. And then when marriage equality became kind of an issue and an important issue, we saw companies stepping up, and companies you would not typically expect. Dow Chemical, Delta Airlines, et cetera, Disney. And then when the president pulled out of Paris, you saw 700 companies literally step up and say, we're still in. One shocking statistic there, Tiffany & Co., the company, 176 years old, they took out a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal stating, we're still in. And now, I mean, most recently we saw companies stepping up to fight gun violence, and last summer we saw 350 companies step up to fight the abortion bans in a variety of southern states. Yeah. So I think you're right that it's...
Why do you think that LGBTQ rights, that marriage equality was the thing that turned the tide for a lot of companies? Why do you think that was kind of an inflection point?
I think it was a lot of work. Activists really kind of raised the issue, and I think there came kind of a reckoning where everyone realized they know someone who is gay, whether it's their sibling or cousin or coworker, and then it became a business issue, because if you had, say, Microsoft wanting to hire a couple that was married in one state and move them to another state that they could not be married, it created major issues. So you had people going to their public policy leaders and to the government, and then we saw the Supreme Court make the big change.
Yeah. Carleen and Lisa, Lush and Lyft, respectively, have taken some stances on issues and have been pretty vocal about their support. Trans rights is one of them for Lush. LGBTQ issues is one of them for Lyft. I'm wondering, how do these companies think about what they are going to kind of put their voice and intention and time behind?
Yeah. We have really strong values as a company, and two of those are be yourself and uplift others. And so when we're thinking about the work that we're doing, we're thinking about how it ties into those values, how it affects our internal community, our employees, as well as our drivers and our riders. And so immigration is an issue that has hit those communities very hard. LGBTQ rights is another one that we've heard a lot from our respective communities. So we're thinking about opportunities to use our voice in a meaningful way. But we're also thinking about opportunities to use transportation. Every way that we think about our impact is through how transportation can make a difference. And so when we think about those initiatives, we're thinking about where transportation can play a role. So with immigration, we've been providing rides through lots of local nonprofits to get people to and from legal appointments, to getting picked up at the border when they're crossing. So lots of opportunities for using transportation to make a meaningful impact. So we're not just using our voice, we're also thinking about how it ties into our core business.
Yeah, I really love the stuff that Lyft did around Hurricane Harvey as well in Houston. I think it was really, really important. So at Lush, I think we make our decisions around issues in three ways. One is our leadership likes to shine light on issues that might not be an issue that other companies want to take on. So in 2017, we, as a business, because we were asked by organizations to do this, called for the abolition of the death penalty. So really excited to hear about Just Mercy coming out and knowing it's going to be amazing. We also try to figure out where Lush can be engaged in an issue that will leave the issue stronger than it was before we actually got engaged in it. And then thirdly, and I think we've heard a lot about this morning, we routinely ask our staff. So because we have 250 stores in North America, it's this amazing range of being able to see not only what people are thinking in the communities where our stores are, but what really matters to staff.
I'm wondering when it comes to staff, again, a few years ago, the idea of your staff being politically active, the idea of welcoming activists and people who call themselves activists in your ranks and for them to promote their causes and how they thought things should be handled was pretty scary for a lot of corporations and I think pretty actively shunned. I'm wondering how you all manage the balance of obviously encouraging people to think and feel passionately about something, which I think is something we can all consider activism, and then also manage kind of the corporate top-down need to be able to control the narrative or to think really intentionally about what being active in a particular issue could mean for a brand or its execution.
I think the successful companies have not tried to control their employees' narratives. I think that you're running a slippery slope since they all have the means to use their own voice. And I do think as much as we see companies pushing forward on all these issues that they would never have done before, they're still fundamentally conservative. But the minute you start trying to clamp down on people's enthusiasm, guess what happens? And so I think, if anything, what you want to do, and the companies that have been successful at this, create a safe space in their companies where people feel they can voice their opinions.
What are some companies that you think have been successful at that?
Well, I think Google has done a very good job. I mean, they have listened to their employees when they were, maybe caught not doing something that their employees felt very positive about. We just saw Wayfair, the employees literally staged a walkout when it was found that the company was selling beds to ICE at the border. And I think when you look at, say, Nike and how Nike responded about a year ago to allegations of not paying women as equal as men and also some sexual harassment, they immediately stepped up and got rid of the problematic employees. But also when they literally supported Colin Kaepernick and his entire cause, it was very much rooted in their employees and what their employees wanted.
Yeah.
Part of what you're talking about is also kind of internal reaction to company policies,
Yes.
but I think with respect to employees and what they want to take action on in the world, we think about differentiating what we address and how we support our community internally from what we do externally. Sometimes they do mirror one another, but sometimes they're different. So when we think about how we act externally, it's always, is there a way for transportation in particular to make an impact in this space? So there are points where we are able to act in that way, and there are points where transportation can't play a role, in which case, what is our voice in that, and why are we taking a stance on it, and does our community want to hear from us in that way? Maybe not our external community. That doesn't mean that internal employees do not, and so we take those apart, and so sometimes things that we aren't able to address publicly because perhaps we don't have a right to as a company because we don't have a stake in that game, we do talk to our employees about that, and we host conversations. We'll work with our employee resource groups to ensure that everybody feels safe and supported within the workplace, even if the company isn't taking a stance publicly on something.
See, and that is so important.
I think this is one of the things I love about these conversations is because so many different brands, even if whatever umbrella you want to put over the brands that do take action or political stances, I find so many of us do it really differently. So, at Lush, we've founded on being a campaigning company from our folks in the UK and have been in the United States or in North America figuring out what's the best way to localize or make more relative the issues that we talk about. So we do, we do our campaigning externally, and we do campaign on the same issues internally. And I think that sometimes is so far from the way that Lyft talks about transportation. I mean, we make soap and bath lotions and body care. So,
but good soap.
We can do, and I mean, you can look at our sustainability efforts or our ethical buying efforts, but on the campaigning stuff, we'll sort of go beyond, can we get soap to the immigration detention centers or the resettlement? The folks from the International Rescue Committee are here, and we kind of constantly, since our work with them in 2016, have been figuring out how we we get soap everywhere. But a lot of the issues that we work on are super distant from what you might think a soap company does. Again, the death penalty or trans rights being some of those examples.
I'm wondering, can you spell out for us, what does listening to your staff and your employees when it comes to issues they want you to be active on, what does that look like? What's the process?
So we have a pretty, as I'm learning, talking to other people, like a pretty in-depth conversation with our staff. We meet with folks fairly frequently, bring people together. We still really believe in that face-to-face communication. But people are consistently polled on the question, what do you think the next issue is that Lush should work on? And they're right. Like the things that I will see being one of the most predominant issues coming up for staff, if we kind of get down, work on it, take about 6 to 10 months to develop a campaign with the right nonprofit partners. When that campaign kind of comes out or goes public, it is a thing that people want to talk about.
Yeah. So I do want to let the audience know, again, we will be taking questions at the end of this. So if you can start breaking out your phones and getting onto Slido and putting those questions in so we can get to as many as possible. So Lyft has said they like to call themselves a woke company, and a lot of the policies and campaigns that you talked about would reflect some level of wokeness. But I'm wondering how Lyft thinks about engaging in things that directly affect its business, such as work and labor rights, where there's obviously some fraud and contention there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that we think about our business is all related to access. So on the ride side of things, we're thinking about how we are tackling unique and specific use cases to get people to a job interview, the grocery store, places where it can be really meaningful. On the driver side of things, we're thinking about access to flexible work. I can speak for myself in having waited tables a lot in my life and bartended. It's really frustrating to not have an opportunity to kind of come in and out of work if you're job searching, if you're working part-time on something. And 91% of our drivers drive less than 20 hours a week. 96% say flexibility is the most important thing for them. So the way that we're thinking about that kind of driver side of things in conversations with labor is to think about how we can provide that access while also providing additional kind of support and benefits to our drivers. So it's kind of an ongoing conversations, but the current model around labor doesn't kind of fit a flexible work schedule and kind of the flexibility of the gig economy, which is really, really integral to why people want to be part of it.
Susan, I'm wondering, do you think this moment where companies are coming out, being incredibly active, are really getting behind both in communication and in terms of monetary giving, et cetera, really getting behind kind of big stances and big moments, do you think this is a trend or do you think this is here to stay?
I personally think it's here to stay, and I think that's because the world is so interconnected. We used to think that business only looked after business in this country, so when something happened internationally, didn't need to pay attention. We are entering a time where climate is going to affect every part of every one of our lives. We have 88.5 million displaced people on this planet, and people have lost trust with traditional pillars of power, whether it be our political systems or our houses of worship. So we are looking to these new areas for guidance for some sort of moral values. And I think unless all those other things I mentioned go away, I think we're going to still see it. But I do think that puts an onus on companies to be studying the issues, and it's a big responsibility, right? Where you have to think, no matter what the Business Roundtable says, you still have to think about your bottom line.
Carleen.
So yeah, I think I agree with you on that. Good. I think our philosophy has always been that we have a platform. So we have our stores in North America and around the world, and we also have our digital channels. And our thing has been definitely to research the issues, but also to partner with organizations who have been doing the work for the longest time, and partner with organizations that you trust, and to ensure that like I was saying before, ensure that the movement's stronger than when we got involved, because the way that we'll do some of the campaigns, they'll be public-facing for a week or 10 days, and then after that we kind of step back, like we stay active, but you don't see it in our windows anymore. So while we have that period of time, while we have millions of customers coming through the doors and seeing stuff online, we want to make sure that they're directed to the organizations that do the work in the long run and are actually the experts.
Yeah, and you mentioned IRC, for instance.
Right.
If I could just interject, though, another reason we're going to see this continue growing is younger people. Gen Z is also showing the same kind of purpose-driven desires that the millennials did when they came out of college and graduate school. So they are going to want to work for companies that are going beyond the bottom line, that have something beyond whatever product that they're making. So as long as that there's this resurgence and customers who want to buy from companies that they perceive to be doing the right thing, I think it's going to be well into the future.
To that point, I'm wondering how much are both of your companies thinking about the bottom line and consumers, and the fact that consumers more and more want to support and put their money towards businesses that they can feel good about buying into. How much are you guys thinking about that when you make decisions about what to support? Lisa?
I think one of the ways where I've seen companies be most successful in corporate responsibility is when the way that they act is tied to the business. So we're not necessarily thinking about the bottom line in the way that we're doing it, but we are thinking about how it ties into the business and how it ties into our unique ability to affect change, which is why, again, we kind of always focus on that transportation aspect. But what we heard in the talk this morning, I think, was talking about how companies are sometimes taking credit for work that is not meaningful or not sustained. I think it's okay to get credit for the work if the work is good and the work is sustained and the work is impactful. So we launched a number of programs in the last couple of years. Two of our biggest ones are our Grocery Access Program and our Jobs Access Program, respectively providing rides to grocery stores for people who live in food insecure areas, and then folks to get to job interviews, job trainings in the first few weeks of their work. We're thinking about and investing in third-party research next year to prove the validity and importance of these programs and to actually understand the nuance of how transportation can have an impact so that we can then ensure that we are doing them right and sustaining them. So I think it's okay to get that business bottom line credit if the work that you're doing is meaningful and actually helping the world, and then it can be a win-win for everyone.
Really?
I think because we were founded by activists in the UK and the way that that's translated over to North America, there's been less concern about figuring out how to measure. I mean, I know Tom this morning spoke about measurements and I was like, oh, we don't really do that, but
you can fake it.
But we have increasingly been, I think, just recognizing, and some of it's anecdotal, but some of it you can sort of add up to people who appreciate what we're doing on social, or will be more likely to talk to their friends about the brand because of some of the ethical stances we take on things. We have some of those metrics now, but for us, really, it just has been baked in from the beginning. And for as much as there's the how do you give other organizations or other companies courage to take this stand? It just really does work for us. Yeah. Has proven it time and time again.
All right, let's take a few audience questions. From Amos. Lisa, is the gig economy compatible with living wages? Juno, the most driver-centric rideshare company, just shut down today. Can Lyft sustain itself and pay drivers well?
Yes, I definitely believe so. I'm not super familiar with what happened with Juno, so I can't speak to that. But as I alluded to earlier, I think we have a whole team focused on the future of work and what that could look like and what a new model looks like, because current employment is not set up for flexibility and not set up for today's workforce and the way the gig economy has risen. And so I think part of it will be really working towards a new middle ground that is not independent contractor versus employment. It is kind of a middle ground that actually works for today's industries. And that is where I think we can be really successful. But that's something that we need to work together with labor and government to get to that point. And we have whole teams working on how to make that possible.
So the next question is, do employees always support the stances that the company makes? And I guess I would tack onto that, what happens when employees disagree with a stance that the company has taken? Is there room for that type of dissent?
Yeah, so I think this question, it kind of relates to the death penalty as well. We have had when we launched that campaign, and as we've done actually with all of our campaigns, there's sort of an internal conversation about what we would do if somebody doesn't agree with the issue. So we have, some pieces in place for that, and that is certainly, based on we're not going to encourage or force people to do something or say something that they don't believe in or they don't want to do. But we believe we have the opportunity to help people get to the place that we're at. If they don't, that's totally fine. But in a workplace, to be able to talk about the pros and cons of the death penalty, and to be able, I have heard dozens of people who work for the business who changed their perspective, having gone through the campaign we did, and that alone, I think, is a giant win for the movement. But very clearly, we would never force people to either do or say something they don't believe.
Sure. And I think that, when we see companies making these major statements, they've done a ton of research on public opinion polling first. I mean, when Dick's Sporting Goods was heroic, in my mind, to, stop selling assault weapons, it came after public opinion in this country has been moving away from the ownership of those guns. So, and we see death penalty, is starting. People aren't as pro-death penalty as they were at one point in time. So I think that you're always going to have people who disagree. I mean, that's just the nature of life.
Mm-hmm. So I think this next question is for you, Lisa, and it gets kind of at that tension that I was mentioning before, where you have a company that is trying to do good or focusing on one area, but consumers or the public is really, really concerned about what they are doing or not doing in another area. So the question is, Lyft is being sued by women who say Lyft didn't do enough to protect them from sexual assault. What role does protecting passengers play in Lyft's purpose?
It's a huge role. Safety has been a number one priority for Lyft from the very beginning. We have launched a whole new, a ton of new features in the last few months, including a first-of-its-kind partnership with ADP. Something that I'm personally really proud of is that we just built, together with Rain, a driver training program that is mandatory for all drivers to take before they're allowed to continue on the platform. So there's a lot happening, and there's a whole team within Lyft focused on that, and it's absolutely part of our purpose, but it's a tough situation, and we're working on it actively.
Do you all think of activism in those areas where historically you've either been weak or there have been lawsuits or there's just been something that comes up that says like, hey, maybe this is a blind spot? How do you think about then including that into the role of kind of campaigns or activism that you're doing?
Do you mean internally or externally?
I think both. Like in a world where you are very involved in the immigration debate, but there is a wage debate that is coming from the public, or there is a conversation about sexual assault or women's rights and how Lyft is or is not being responsive to that. Do you then think about making that kind of a public-facing platform where you're going to put time and effort and investment?
Yeah, I think we are. We are constantly thinking about how we're getting the messages out about the work that we're doing internally. As many of you in this room possibly know, it's hard to kind of toot your own horn and talk about the work that you're doing. And so we're trying to find the right platforms to get out there and talk about how we're envisioning kind of new models of work for this new and ever-changing workforce. We're trying to get there and out there and talk about all that we're doing on safety and how that how it actually works internally and how we respond to everything that comes in through our doors and how safety is a top priority for us. But that requires people to listen. And so it is definitely something we're working on. But it's not always something that people are receptive to listening to be honest.
Carleen, did you have a quick response to that?
Yeah, just quickly, whenever we've done the research on the campaigns, it is also internally, so we're looking at what we're doing.
Yep.
So when we talked about trans rights in 2018, part of the conversation was with all of our trans and gender nonconforming staff to see what we could do better as a business. So at the end of our campaigns, or I guess at the launch of them really, like we are a better company internally because of doing the work so we can talk about something externally.
Yeah.
Well, we could be up here all day, and I know you all want lunch, so we will end there. Please join me in thanking our panel.
And thank you.